Holy Father, Superior General David, I'd like to make my recommendations as the arbiter here in this whole situation with the excommunication of the SSPX clergy and so on. And I do so, of course, as an Eastern Catholic. That's why I was specifically brought in to be an arbiter here. These are my recommendations after all that I've seen and heard. I'm not going to make judgments, simply recommendations. And remember, our whole discussion here was based on two principles, honesty and humility. So, in regard to honesty, for the Holy Father and the Vatican, there needs to be greater honesty or clarity in terms of what really is the issue here. What is the issue the Vatican actually has, or the SSPX? Is it the liturgy itself, the Mass, the traditional Latin Mass? Is it what the SSPX believes? Or is it a case just of their obedience to the Holy Father? I think that needs to be clarified as to what is the issue. Maybe it's all three, maybe it's one or two, whatever. Again, I'm not judging, I'm making recommendations that might bring about a reconciliation. In terms of the SSPX, there has to be great honesty, especially publicly, in your literature, website, and so on, about what you actually believe. Because we've noticed that there's kind of a downplaying of certain things that you know can be rather controversial and inflammatory. Such as in your website, you had an article that said, is the new Mass legitimate? And the response by the SSPX is that it is not legitimate. In fact, it is intrinsically evil. In other words, the Novus Ordo. And that people should not go there. In fact, if they did attend a Novus Ordo Mass, it was considered to be a sin, to be confessed. This is in your previous literature. Now, you're kind of downplaying that now, but there's a certain dishonesty in that. You've got to be completely upfront as to what it is that you actually believe, because when these things have been discovered, and we have to again be honest here, you have actually lost some followers. So it's very important to be honest about who you really are, what you're about. Now, in terms of humility on both sides, the Vatican has to understand that in the last two pontificates particularly, there has been a perception. I'm not judging it. I'm simply saying this is what is. A perception of ambiguity in the Church and from the Pope and the Vatican as to what to believe, what the Vatican is actually saying. And there's been inconsistencies. This is what the rank and file people, the sheep, have perceived. And it's caused confusion. And there needs to be, I believe, and again I'm recommending because I'm the arbiter, there needs to be a kind of an apology, an explanation, because this has caused consternation among the sheep who were supposed to accompany. Also, the presentation of this decree, and it is the opinion of many canon lawyers, credible canon lawyers, that this presentation of this decree of excommunication of the SSPX is fraught with many canonical problems, many canonical confusions. I think that has to be admitted and addressed. In terms of the SSPX, you have to have the humility to admit that you should not have gone through with the ordination of these bishops, because it was a flagrant act of disobedience to the Holy Father. Even if you thought this was necessary, you cannot be that disobedient to the Pope of Rome. Otherwise, we justify disobedience on the other end of things. For example, you justified ordaining these bishops because it was a need in the Church. The Church was in crisis, and you used canon law to base that on. Well, this is what, for instance, some of the German bishops are claiming as well. For them, the crisis in the Church is the very teaching of the Church. It's got to be changed. All the customs traditions have to be changed. We have to have women priests. We have to have blessed same-sex marriages. They think this is a crisis, that the Church isn't doing these things. So can they go ahead and do them under that idea of a crisis? We have to be very careful. There's a tendency in the Church today, especially in the West, to have different groups believe that they are the magisterium. They are what is truly Catholic. It's become very rigid about that, even cultish about it. And so this is a humility that the SSPX must be called to. So what's the solution? The solution is revisit the Mass as the Second Vatican Council actually spoke about it, not after the Council. The actual Mass that was spoken about in the documents of the Second Vatican Council. I think this would be very helpful in the West. Also, go back to what Pope Benedict XVI has done. He seemed to be on the road to living and bringing the church into the both and rather than the either or, which is, of course, what we're about in the Eastern churches, what needs to happen here. A meeting in the both and, not the polarization, the either or. And Pope Benedict XVI was en route to that. Maybe that needs to be revisited as well. And also, we need to take example of the Eastern Catholic churches. They are trivialized, they're overlooked by the West oftentimes. SSPX, I know you have basically no use for the Eastern churches either, because you think anything beyond what you are is not really fully valid. Let's be honest. We have to be honest here, otherwise there'll be no healing. The Eastern Catholic churches and their contribution has been taken very seriously, as Pope Leo XIV has said, and even popes before that. And the Eastern churches can teach us a lot about reconciling things that seem to be where institutional versus the prophetic dimension of the church are clashing, where authority and piety are clashing. The Eastern churches have a lot to teach us about that, and also about living in the both and. So I want to thank both of you for being here. These are my findings and my suggestion as the arbiter. Let us pray as Jesus prayed, that we might one day all be one.